It is still good morning. Good morning. So I have to let you in on something. I am trying something different today. I've decided not to have any slides. And let's see how that goes. I'm also prepared, which is something I usually don't do. I'm actually quite spontaneous. And I've had some coaching from Lita Curry over there, where actually I'm testing my own growth, saying, so what would this look like if I'm prepared? So I've got notes. I have no idea what I'm going to do with it, because I'm obviously not keeping to it now. But Lita said it is a safety blanket if I do get a little unsure of myself. I don't know who has done this quote, but I do love the quote of someone who many years ago, I think it might be centuries, said, I am too busy to write you a short letter, so I'm going to write you a long letter. Who is it? Blaise Pascal, thank you so much. It is quite controversial, so I'm going to move right off topic because I've got 22 minutes left. But there is an art in being very specific about what it is that you want to say. So thank you for allowing me to experiment on you. If I get off track, I'm going to read my notes. Please allow me to do that because I really want to get a short letter message across to you guys today. So strong introductions is what it's about. Lita told me that. I mustn't tell them the whole structure thing. No, that's not a strong introduction. My strong introduction is I'd like to ask you, within your organization, how much time, effort, energy, resources, burnout, colleagues have you had in trying to realize a big, hairy, audacious strategy? And if I had a crystal ball, I could tell you that you have all got really great strategies, but that it's really tough to create that outcome and that output and that amazing end path of the journey to say we have actually arrived. I work in financial services, so we really are chameleon-like in trying to be there in servicing the needs of our customers. Now, I think there is a missing link, and obviously the answer is at the back of me. I so miss my slides. Look how amazing the screen is. So I'm just going to point to my name for the 20 minutes. Culture is the soup that we swim in every day. And of course, I've only heard one or two of the speakers this morning. They've actually already started telling you that how we show up in the workplace, how that culture emerges is actually a very important ingredient in your strategy actually being successful. Now, I like the way this works, by the way, because there's a point I wasn't going to make. Obviously, I shouldn't do that then. Culture is the best form of defense and attack in organizations. Please raise your hands. Please raise your hands. If you have heard in a meeting where big decisions need to be taken, where someone says, this isn't going to work for our culture, or our culture is not used to stuff like this, right? Like it's a person that goes to the bathroom and brings a lunch bag to work. Who is culture? I have great difficulty having the title, the head of culture. I mean, that's quite a difficult concept. My favorite one, though, is HR has to fix culture by paying people differently, Anya. So I'm very much on your page around it being used as a form of defense and attack. It is true that culture and strategy together are the key enablers of the success of an organization. Your strategy is your guiding path. It is talking about the vision of what it is that you want to achieve. So it is actually really important. Let me use a generic phrase, and I'm sure you've heard this before. We are going to be a future-fit organization that is flexible and responsive to market conditions and really contributing value to our clients. That sounds cool, right? Thank you. I made that up, actually. But you would recognize that as quite a nice, firm, you have a feeling in your tummy that that's a great strategy. There's probably objectives and tasks, and probably if you're a large enough organization, a project office, that is scurrying away to actually make that vision happen. Hear what I say? It is a guiding path. Your driving path is how you decide to show up when you are executing on that strategy. Behavior, values, practices are the driving path to make that strategy actually happen. So let's use that famous example of mine of articulating a strategy of a company that doesn't exist. So if you want to be flexible and responsive, you might actually want to think of a practice that says you are curious about new ideas, right? Because how else are you going to be flexible and responsive in the market if you're not actually curious about new ideas? That's a great practice. If you translate that into a behavior, it might look like this. You are then saying, I am going to have a pot of budget available in which I'm going to try proofs of concepts before I abandon the idea or back it as a viable option. So suddenly you've got a practice and a behavior that tells people and helps people believe that you are actually serious about being flexible and responsive. So you can see that beautiful connection between the two, right? Here's our problem. We spend way too little time articulating the shift we want to see. We articulate the strategic direction beautifully, and then we hope and pray that the behavior follows. So the good news that I've got today is if you spend a bit of time on saying, what would that behavior look like? What would that practice be that I pay attention to? You actually don't need a lot of formal communication about your strategy. People will observe what it is that you are actually paying attention to. It's as hard and as simple as that. So here is my summary in a picture. Your strategy is your rocket, your behavior is your fuel, and there's a third element called fuel injection that I'm going to tell you a little bit more about. Lita said you kind of hold people at the end of their seats saying there's something coming, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. That's what I'm doing now. So there's a third element that we'll call fuel injection that I'm going to get to a little bit later. Can I get a hand for a strong introduction? Thank you. Whew. It's stressful, I must tell you. So there's 3 key takeouts that I want you to remember today, and 3's work, by the way. There's lots of neuroscience being done around it, but actually I do have 3 points to make. Thank goodness for that. So the first one is what we talked about now. In achieving your strategy, you can actually articulate the behavior shift that you want to see. We don't spend equal amounts of time on it. So the first thing I want to say about this first takeout is, as audacious organizations with a huge agenda to transform, we love using language like quantum leap, huge changes, very big transformations. Fourth industrial revolution, you open the internet and you're basically blown away by the extent of the change required. I can say with reasonable certainty that if you use that language in behavior change, the only thing that you are going to awaken is people's defense mechanisms. And that's a bit of the negativity I have around future skills, and we have to make this huge transformation. First of all, a person would ask, am I not valuable any longer? I have got so much to learn, and actually those defense mechanisms unconsciously just start popping up. So in behavior shift, a concept that I like is called adjacent transformation. I don't think Pascal came up with that, but someone famous did. But I'm trying not to love models like you taught me, so I don't know what model adjacent transformation is. So adjacent transformation is around being curious and aware about the habits and practices that you see in your organization, and asking the question, are they useful? If they are not driving crisply and clearly the strategic direction you are looking for, there is an ability to use that current practice and nudge it into the right direction. Who's heard about nudge theory? You'll be very unpopular if you haven't. Ed, have you heard? Yes, you have. Good for you. So adjacent transformation means, as hairy and audacious as your strategic goal is, as tiny and deliberate should your behavior goal actually be. So I want to use an example. A said country, it could be in our company, it might not be. So let's say a said country had a strategic goal, think about the rocket, had a strategic goal of putting the customer at the center of everything they do. Sounds like a bank, right? But it is really a strategic direction that they were very serious about. They then started to have a look at the fuel, at the behaviors they've got in their organization. And as a small, universal country delivering good service to their customers, they realized their behavior was that they had great relationships at an exco level. They really got along well. They really were a really solid team. But I think it was Stephen that spoke about hierarchy. Despite the fact that they had really great relationships as an exco, they were separated from the rest of the organization. So they took that curiosity and said, if we take this great relationship that we have as an Exco team and we spread it in the organization, might that help us be more available to the customer? And they packed up their desks, and for a few mornings a month, they went and sat on the shop floor in and amongst employees busy building products, servicing IT systems, and actually helping and supporting customers. So the first symbolic act that interest they've had, because you can imagine, employees that never see Exco members, suddenly they pop up on the floor. So immediately there's a little bit of gossip and discussion. No formal comms, nobody says that they are coming. And actually what it started creating is a message of we are in this together. We are here to service the customer together. So that togetherness orientation that started with people starting to ask. Some of the cheeky influencers walked up to the Exco member saying, what are you doing here? And he's saying, I'm just working here this morning. What are you busy with? Is there something that you might need help on? Obviously, you know how the bell curve of change works. For the first 3 weeks, everybody thought this was the way bonus distribution was going to work in the company, so they better be on their best behavior. But that first lone nut, one morning, went to the head of legal, just randomly sitting on his floor, with a huge issue that he had with a customer that he couldn't solve. I call him a lone nut, because you always have to have that first person that's willing to go, I'm going to stick my neck out and try something new. Good news for the head of legal, she could help solve that particular problem, and that story went viral. People started saying, do you know why the Exco members are on your floor? They're on your floor to actually be helpful. And that created quite a change in people saying, not only do they want to be helpful, we are in this together in solving the customer query. No comms, no HR policy, no schedule of when the Exco member is going to be on the floor. So again, a carefully crafted nudge with something that the Exco team was already good at in service of something that they want to achieve in their strategy. Is that a good story? I'd like a round of applause, please. So how did it make a difference? It helped people believe that change is possible, and it helped people believe that you can show up in a different way. If they had gone from one extreme to the other, people would just be defensive. But the Exco team was already an approachable team, but they weren't being approachable in service of the strategy. Connect the two, and that's where the magic actually happens. So, 3 takeouts, summary. Oh, I'm on the wrong side. Lita, what do I do now? I continue reading until I get to the second takeout, right? So takeout number 1. In achievement of your strategy, you need to articulate the behavior shift. Banked. Everybody's got that, right? Good. The second takeout, which is now back to the introduction, which obviously shows I've never done this before. The second takeout is behavior changes in nudges and tiny shifts, consistently executed and practiced. So some people would think that's bad news, but actually it's really good news. It means that as much as people are intimidated by the work changes they have to go through, they'll probably be open to try a tiny shift. And that's actually all that you are asking for. Remember, I'm also saying nudges aren't random. So when nudge theory started in HR, you know what we always do with stuff, criticize as you might. We wanted to be random and spontaneous about it and said, you know what, just start smiling at people. That should help. Of course, it created, goodwill, and I know someone paid for my coffee twice because I smiled in the queue and I didn't have any money for coffee. The smile really helped. But it wasn't connected to strategic progress necessarily. You have to craft that nudge so that it helps a current practice and pushes a strategic point forward. Sometimes a little bit more difficult than you think. So my second takeout is behavior changes in nudges and tiny shifts. If you look at that adjacent transformation bit, it's really, really key that you have a look at those practices that are really important. So I've done 2 at the moment. Let me just check. Blah, blah, blah. Distinct, focus and interest. All right. So the third bucket. So we realize that behavior changes in tiny shifts. Secondly, that strategically you are actually able to connect the dots. I'm going to repeat what Anya said, and repetition is very good. I said the third point is absolutely around taking the fuel, taking the rocket, and giving it fuel injection. And exactly like Anya said earlier, psychological safety is the magic that actually gets you there. It's not incentives, it's not a promise of a promotion, it's not a seat at the Exco offsite. Again, you can Google psychological safety. I liked Anya's definition. Mine is similar, maybe plain language. Psychological safety is the absence of fear of being embarrassed or punished for speaking up. That sounds plain and simple enough, right? Ed, surely in meetings, when somebody is derailing the project, whether this cannot happen or are you crazy, surely you give that person feedback that that's not really useful, right? Yes, yes. Yeah, let's take that offline when you want to give someone difficult feedback. Surely when your boss overcommits to a huge deliverable to a client that creates huge backlogs in your team and puts them under extreme pressure, you are able to tell your boss, I don't think that's fair, and I want to create a different solution, right? Surely you do that. Psychological safety in speaking up is also for the positive, though. It's not just giving difficult feedback. Good psychological safety is when you back a crazy colleague's idea without the fear of reputational risk when that goes south. So I'm not going to back you either, just in case you fall out of favor in 3 days' time. Ain't me that said that was a good idea. Surely you do that. And then the last one, again my favorite, is where you give kudos without expecting those political points in the next meeting that that person's going to back you again. So psychological safety has those two elements. We love to focus on the one particularly, where we say you must be able to give somebody tough feedback, but you must be able to back big ideas. That's definitely what psychological safety is about. Just want to find my place here. Basic definition, simple enough, surely. Oh, psychological safety has a bodily reaction as well, and Lita helped me think of that. Psychological safety is that moment in a meeting when you have those nervous butterflies in your stomach and you know it's the right thing to say something, but there's a hidden barrier called culture that stops you from speaking up, but also then stops you from being heard. So let me go back to my example of my country of approachable EXCO members. Psychological safety was created between that head of legal and that services manager that approached her. First of all, the head of legal needed to be a lone nut. She needed to stick her head out and say, I'm available for a question, even if I don't have the answer. So she put herself on the line for maybe being ostracized as she's not credible or an expert in what she does because she couldn't help me. So she needed to put it out there. The services manager, who was working in this culture swimming where you don't approach senior leadership, had to take up that access and actually be quite courageous in saying, you know what, I've got a problem and you need to help me. So there was reciprocity and actually a good outcome that is volumes of psychological safety. As you can hear as well, your organization is full of stories. You can build those stories in those moments that you actually create. Because as I said earlier, that message actually went quite viral. So let us think about that head of legal example. The rocket was client centricity, the fuel was togetherness, and the psychological safety was access and openness to be helpful. You have created an entire culture stream by just working that narrative in a more positive way. There are two disproportionate enablers of psychological safety, which was very interesting for me when I started doing a bit of research. And again, Google is your friend, you might find others. But the particular model that I looked at said that peer support and role clarity are disproportionate enablers of psychological safety. So let's have a look at role clarity first. Role clarity is not a job description like clarity. It is role clarity that says, in the next few weeks, think about my example, in the next few weeks, where am I going to find the opportunities to show up in a helpful way towards my colleagues to potentially solve a customer issue? When we talk about role clarity, we ask what people should be doing, right? We should spend an equal amount of time saying, how do we want you to show up in that experience? It makes all the difference. And the conversation is only 5 minutes longer. Peer support is the second disproportionate factor, and that is what I love about this particular model. The head of legal got her biggest kudos from a junior member of staff who said, "You really helped me. Thank you very much." She wasn't looking around to see if the chief executive was there seeing what she was doing. The psychological safety was created because she was being a lone nut and she had a first follower saying, "I'm going to take that gap you gave me." So don't underestimate, again, I think Stephen talked about hierarchy, and I actually wrote it down on the spare piece of paper I had. Stephen talked about hierarchy and networks. That is a network forming. Next time they're going to speak to that head of legal again. And she might not always be accessible. She might not always be able to help. And that's a practice that might over time need to be formalized in like a roaming office policy. But for now, let it be. Celebrate the moment, get the story out there. So 3 buckets. To achieve your strategy, you have to articulate the behavior shift. Behavior shift happens in nudges and small shifts practiced consistently. And you need psychological safety to actually make that happen, right? Thank you. Have I got 4 minutes left? I've been talking for 5 minutes only. I'm prepared. Anyway, that's not working. I've got 3 minutes left, so I've got a quick last story to pull it all together for you. It's one of my favorites. A said generic company, could be Standard Bank, could, be anyone, had a change of chief executives. The previous chief executive was famous for his amazing speeches and his amazing road shows. He was a really great inspirational speaker. And when the new chief executive joined, the stories were a mess about how amazing this chief executive was. The current chief executive was obviously swimming around in the culture that amazing previous chief executive created. This new chief executive had a different style, though. He really wanted to take that good organization and radically transform it to one of the best organizations in that country. He was curious about what people valued and paid attention to in that country and knew that a connection with the CE was important. But his style was taking that engagement, and instead of it being a stage, he was out on the shop floor, chatting to people and really trying to understand what the issues were that was hindering them from becoming a transformational organization. He did 2 things. He listened very carefully, not only for the issues, but what people were saying, and who were the people that were coming forward. So Jovanka would be the one that says, I've got the guts, I'm going to tell the chief executive what's really going on. So he would write Jovanka's name down. And Jovanka would say, you have to speak to Tabiso. She'll tell you where the bodies are buried. And he would write Tabiso's name down. What he would also do in that engagement is very crisply and clearly and in plain language share what his priorities were. They have a Yammer platform, and they would use the opportunity to say the chief executive was here, and this is what his priorities are. Social networking is alive and well in the world. Why don't we use it in our organizations? By the time he formally communicated his priorities, the lone nuts and the first followers all knew what his priorities were. The favoriteness in my story, though, is he visited a branch the one day, and there was music playing. So without him thinking that anybody was seeing what he was doing, he walked in a little Madiba shuffle. Well, the crowd went wild, and everybody was shuffling with him. And that's actually become a symbolic act of that chief executive. He is now a victim to his own greatness in the fact that no session can start without a little bit of ignition and a little bit of dancing. So what is the story there? That chief executive took the energy of engagement and put his own stamp on it, being real and approachable. Being real and approachable meant people gave him real feedback, and he could get his real message out there. Sounds quite spontaneous, but it was actually quite a particular message that he wanted to get out there. He worked with the current culture and just shifted it for the usefulness of the radical transformations he had in mind. Does that make sense? Cool. Thank you. Thanks, Sean. I planted Sean to clap when I was finished with the sentence, but thank you. He was a lone nut and you were the first followers. Well done, proved my theory. So here's my call of action in my last 30 seconds. I know this sounds very basic. Be curious like that chief executive. What habits exist in the organization? What are people paying attention to? Take that very habit and just shift it slightly towards more crisp articulation of the strategic progress that you want to make. It's harder than you think, but absolutely worthwhile. Take that habit and nudge it in a new direction. You will be surprised at the impact that will have. Thank you very much. Zero.